Well, welcome, guys. We have Randy Thomas and Christopher Ward and myself again here for a rest stop. We're going to take a little rest stop on our journey, and we're going to actually look at a couple of disciples who were on a journey with Jesus. Actually, Jesus came up and joined them in their journey. So if you're not familiar with it, we're looking at Luke 24 and finding a couple of disciples on the road to Emmaus. So we're picking up here and having these little rest stops because we find that sometimes along the way, it's good to think about what we're going through. We've talked about being stuck before, and this is an incident where some people are kind of stuck. Ironically, they're moving, they're physically walking to a place, but they're not too sure what has just happened in their lives. So we find some of the women early in the morning finding the tomb empty, and they go back to the 11. So this is in Luke 24:11. But the apostles don't believe the women because their words seem to them like nonsense. And I think that's the phrase that
you can't blame them. I mean, it is weird to say, hey, his body's not there. I mean, that you've got to admit that's unexpected.
Exactly. Yeah. So we would do well to say, yeah, it's kind of nonsensical. Peter gets up and runs to the tomb then. So he bends over and sees the strips of linen lying by themselves, but then he went away wondering to himself what had happened. Okay, so the apostles are having a hard time with this. Peter goes to investigate, and even after seeing it, of course, he's like, what has happened?
Yeah.
He doesn't really know. And I think we can probably think back of times where something is so surprising, so unexpected, that we are really left bewildered, disoriented. Yeah. Probably some things come to mind that way with each of you. Any of you have a story that especially portrays that?
Yeah, I just think, now this is really good news, as in the case of Jesus being alive, but maybe not on quite the same scale. But, I think back of when we found out that Hannah was pregnant with our firstborn. In a way, it was somewhat a surprise, even though we were both wanting. It's what we were wanting. And I think my first reaction was to question it and, be like, are you sure? There was some doubt there. Did you take a second test? Let's get a doctor to confirm, and even after that, you're surprised when you finally see the bump, the pregnancy bump, or you see the ultrasound, and, the news is good, and you finally just, it really just, you're just taken aback by the news. And my first instinct was to question until, you're actually holding the baby and you're like, okay, this is real. I believe it. We're good. We can move forward. So
that's a great illustration. So it's not just the shocking bad news of a crisis, but even the good news is hard to receive.
Yeah.
Hard to really embrace. We could probably talk at length about all of that, but we've felt that. Well, with that setting, Luke moves on from Peter to follow two disciples we don't know. He mentions two disciples on the road heading to Emmaus, and as they're walking along, Jesus comes up alongside them and travels with them. But they don't recognize that it's Jesus. They're actually kept from recognizing who it is. So, as they're walking along, he says, what are you discussing? What are you discussing as you walk along here? One of them, named Cleopas, they're standing still with their faces downcast, says, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened here in these days? What things? Jesus asked. About Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. So what a scene. Two are walking along. Jesus comes up, engages them, and they don't even recognize who it is, and asks them what they're talking about. And right there, they're dumbfounded.
Yeah. Don't you think that Jesus was going, oh, this is going to be so much fun. I can't wait. Let's see, how can I do this? How can I do this? It's almost like, attending your own funeral and just hearing what people would say.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more. Tell me more. No. Come on, tell me more.
You haven't heard about Jesus of Nazareth? As they say to Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed, and then he was crucified.
Yeah. He had to be one of his favorite conversations.
Oh my gosh. It's certainly one of mine. Yeah, so you're seeing Jesus really seizing on this opportunity. What strikes you, Christopher? What stands out to you so far here?
Yeah, well, yeah, just first you think about how it's so fascinating. Jesus put himself into this conversation. You have two people grappling with what happened. It's a very ordinary scene, really, right? No one is sick. No one's needing to be healed. It wasn't a big crowd. No apparent miracle other than, Jesus hiding his identity somehow. And it's just two people walking and talking about their disappointments. And it's like, we can relate to that so easily. And how many times would we wish Jesus to show up and give us the answer, right? But it really strikes me as to how short-sighted people we are. We don't get it a lot of the time. You have Jesus who predicted what was going to happen to him. You have at least a few of his followers share what happened, how they saw an angel, and here they are talking about how they thought he was going to go redeem Israel, and the assumption is that he didn't. And yet he has redeemed Israel in a way that was beyond their dreams and their capacity at that time. And yeah, I go back to how I respond when I hear good news of, we're going to have a baby. There's some skepticism. I think of what else I must be blind to, or as Jesus put it, how slow of you to believe what the prophets have spoken. So that's kind of what hits me in this passage.
Yeah, it's a moment of deep reflection. They're sharing the news of what they've recently experienced, and then this complete crash. But we had hoped. It's all in the past.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that's just so much like us, because when things don't go the way we think they should go, we naturally assume then that God has either abandoned us or we mistook his will, we don't understand, and so we assume that failure has happened, when really God has just done his most important work. The most critical work he ever could have done was happening right in their very midst, and they didn't get it. They must be really good leadership potential here, these two guys, because I know we don't know anything about them, but they have to be leaders in a church someplace, because that's how we tend to react. It's like, oh no, the sky is falling, things aren't going like we thought, and we don't attribute the fact that God's not done with his story yet, or that we don't really understand, and we don't have the trust that we need to have that says, God, you are still at work, and we don't see it. We don't understand it. It's not happening like we thought it was supposed to happen, but we trust you. That's where we need to be, and that's what they missed.
So we were all in.
Yep.
We thought he was the one.
Yep.
We had hoped, and he's been crucified. And now what's worse, our women have gone and they can't even find his body.
Yeah.
And so here they are lamenting the loss of the Savior as they talk to the risen Savior.
Yeah. And they must have been so dejected that they just gave up on the whole thing and left town. They just, well, might as well go back to farming or fishing or tailoring or whatever our jobs were. That maybe they were there for the Passover, but they are leaving as two dejected guys,
Yeah, it
totally
says that
disillusioned.
when Jesus saw them, they stood still with their faces downcast.
Yeah.
So they really are stuck. They're there. Where do we go from here? And that's something we've got to embrace to really enter into the story of what all of these disciples were going through. Because sometimes, whether it's good news or bad news, it can be so startling that we're left really not knowing what to do. So here they are moving, but not really moving. And I think I empathize with their disorientation, although Jesus seems to be a little less than empathetic. Um, he gives them a whole story, the whole rendition of what the scriptures say about him, and says that they are slow to believe what the prophets have said. But before we get to that, I guess that disorientation thing, I remember Christopher and I were actually on a mission trip after Hurricane Katrina hit Biloxi, and we went to help some of that devastation. And I didn't see this particular family, but while we're down there, I heard of a family whose house was just a mess, and the helpers, the volunteers, came to help them, and the two elderly people, were sitting outside doing nothing, not moving, totally dejected, completely in despair.
Yeah.
With like, we don't know what to do next when you see that big of a mess. As the volunteers began to clean stuff up, eventually the lady got up and picked up a broom. Now that's that's a beautiful picture in my mind. But she wasn't gonna budge until then. It's just, where do you start?
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus then talks with them, and he says, how foolish you are to believe all the prophets have spoken, and says, did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. How would you like to be in that Bible study?
Let me explain it to you. Let me make it clear.
Well,
that
they had 7 miles worth of time to. So I mean, you think about the time, 7 miles of what rate they were going, man. That would have been that's a few hours, I'd imagine.
Well, when you're going to do what all the scriptures say, it probably would have taken some time. Okay.
Yeah.
I had a friend in California that said, oh, I wish I could have been at that Bible study. Oh, what would that have been like? As they are then approaching the village, Jesus acted as if he was going farther, but they made him stay. They urged him to stay, and as they sat down, he broke the bread, and when he did, immediately their eyes were open and they recognized him, and he disappeared. And their thought was, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Wow. Oh my goodness. So much in that story. What do you think of Jesus through all of this? We know about disorientation. We know about crushed hopes. We know how hard it is for us to accept startlingly bad news or even encouraging good news. What do you see about Jesus coming to meet two guys who were walking along to who knows where with their hopes crushed.
First of all, I think it's pretty interesting. He chooses these two guys who we know nothing about. It's not like they were frontline name headliners. We we don't even know what one of the is named. In fact, I read a commentary earlier that said, well, it could have been his wife. We don't know who the second individual was, but Jesus made sure that even we common people, the no-namers, that we're starting to get a good idea. And if you start listing the people that he's appeared to, he first appears evidently to Mary Magdalene, who you wouldn't, if you were trying to build a case, you wouldn't pick a woman to in that day and time to appear to. And then, of course, evidently he appears to Peter. We get that. We see that's referred here in this text. But then his next appearance is to these two guys who we know nothing about. So it's curious to me that Jesus cares enough about the people that seem to be just part of the flock, not the leaders per se, but he cares about all of us, and he's coming alongside these two guys because they feel so dejected, and they might have been the first two of his disciples that left Jerusalem and given up hope, and they're going home, and he says, no, I'm going to fix this.
Yeah, I love that he just shows up in an ordinary moment of just discouragement. I mean, that's just so, I mean, isn't that what we want? Like, when we feel discouraged and just like hopeless and disappointed, and yet that, here Jesus shows up in that moment and teaches them and shares something about him that we all are so envious of and wish we were able to be a part of. I mean, that's, yeah, how special for them, and that we get to hear this story in the way that Jesus presented himself.
Yeah, and how special for us too, because our first response would be, why didn't he just show up and be understood, be recognized?
Mm-hmm.
But then this all goes away.
Yeah.
The fact that he came quietly, came unrecognized, and said, what things? And then acted as if he was going farther. They had to specifically beg him to stay. Otherwise, they could have talked to Jesus and never known it.
Yeah.
So he comes and quietly interacts right where they are, kind of plummets, digs deep into their hearts, hears the despair, and then reveals the answer. And then he's gone. And they're left with, weren't our hearts burning as he opened the scriptures to us?
Yeah. And then it changed everything for them, because they had already planned on, we've walked our 7 miles. We're not going to walk anymore. We're going to go home. And what happens? They say, "Oh, we got to go back to Jerusalem." So that within the hour, they're back on the road again.
That's right. Yeah, they convinced him to stay because it was late, but then it's later, and they have to go back to Jerusalem.
No, it's changed everything. We got to get on the road again. I can hear Willie Nelson singing that.
Some news takes priority.
That's right. They couldn't go to sleep with that. They had to go tell the apostles. Yeah. Look, what the women told us, it's happening. Jesus really is alive. It's a game changer.
Yeah. We had hoped, and now our hearts are burning with hope.
And it has to be shared.
Yeah. Anything else strike you, Christopher?
Oh no, that's exciting. Yeah. Nothing in particular, but yeah, I love this story.
So much to learn, because we see the more we look at it, there's so much there, which again is like Jesus. This to me is one of the pinnacles of Jesus as the teacher. He meets people right where they are, enters into what they're feeling, and reveals to them what they most need to know right there.
Do you think he still does that?
That's what I'm so excited about.
Yeah, yeah. Me too.
And that's really the good news. Because here we are a day after they got the good news and they don't know what to do. Peter sees the empty tomb and he doesn't know what to make of it. And here we are in life with confusion, mystery, surprises, disappointments that we don't know what to do with, uncertainty that plagues our every step. And yet Jesus gives us a little story that if we're willing to believe what he said, he can put stuff together. Let's thank him for that. Mm-hmm. Lord, it causes our hearts to rejoice, just to be reminded again that you meet us right where we are. Thank you for this story, for Cleopas and whoever else that was, that you met and spoke to and used that conversation to bless our hearts. Continue to teach us and those around us who are struggling and hurting, that we would come to rely on you all the more. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, guys. I am encouraged. I can't get enough of God reminding us of the good things he's doing.
Sweet stuff. Yeah. All right.
Take
Good
care.
to see you guys. Blessings.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.